Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the May version of the Marin Economic Briefing. My name is Mike Blakely, and I am the CEO of the Marin Economic Forum. We're a 501c3 nonprofit public benefit organization here in Marin County, providing research and advisory on the local and regional economy. These briefings are intended to be short summarization of what we're seeing happening in the economy each month, and we like to take you through the national, state, and local key economic indicators to try to gauge the health and wellness of our economy. You can find out more about these and look at past months or make sure you're signed up for the next months by visiting our website at marineconomicforum.org. Well, a lot to get to today. As usual, the economy continues to be confusing with different things happening, whether it's in the banking sector. There's been a lot of talk about AI recently. So there's a lot of things that certainly can affect our local economy here. And joining me as usual is Dr. Rob Eiler, who serves as MEF's chief economist. He's going to take us through some of the key economic indicators. And at the end, I'll come back and talk a little bit about the county budget. I'd use the occasion to say, if you do have a question, please put it in the chat. We'll try our best to get to it. And as usual, this session is being recorded, and we'll send you a link to the recording at the end of today. So thank you again for joining us. And let me invite Rob to come on in and chat with us this morning. Hi, Rob.
Hi, Mike. Thanks so much for having me. And folks, thanks so much for making the time today. As Mike said, please put your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to them. One of the biggest questions I get.
Are you there, Rob?
Oh, yes.
Okay, let's give a minute for Rob to join here.
Oh, that's really weird. Why are they not working? Oh, that's weird. Mike, are you there? Mike, are you there? Oh, why is that not working? Mike, can you hear me? Good. Great, here we go. Okay. Mike, you might not be able to hear me, but it sounds like everybody else can, so I'm just going to continue. Sorry about that, folks. So anyway, one of the biggest questions I get about the economy is what is going on in terms of the declaration of recession or how close we're getting to recession. One of the reasons why we have not had a declared recession yet is the following graph, is because the jobs market in the US continues to kind of plod forward. You can see that 102.4 on the far right-hand side suggests that we're 102.4% or 2.4% above where we were in January 2020, seasonally adjusted for the US in terms of job growth. So you think of this graph as the evolution of the total number of people working in the United States and what's happened since January 2020. You see the hard dip on the far left-hand side during the immediate contraction of the pandemic, and then the continuation of it through April 2023, which has shown this sort of slow, steady movement. So that right now is the one reason we have not had a declared recession yet, is even though we've had some hiccups in terms of inflation-adjusted GDP growth, we have not seen jobs markets really contract yet. Now, with that in mind, one of the things to watch for is that this is the favorite price index of the Federal Reserve. And we're not sure yet if the Federal Reserve is going to be able to push the price data through these red dots, which is its current forecast. So in essence, that solid blue line is the cost after you take food and energy out of the shopping basket we buy at home. Every household in the United States buys at home on a monthly basis versus 12 months ago. So that March 4.6% is how much more that shopping cart costs. Again, after you remove food and energy prices or food and energy goods and services. That's why it's called core personal consumption expenditures prices. 4.6% higher than March 2022. That solid blue line is meant to go through the red dots in that shaded area. And if it doesn't, the Federal Reserve is going to wonder whether or not interest rates should continue to rise. So what's next is that we have this confusing inflation signal, but inflation is still relatively high, meaning that we've maybe seen the peak in this cycle in terms of prices, but it's still wanting to fall down at a very, very slow pace. And part of that's because we still have a lot of pressure in supply chains, mainly from the demand side because jobs haven't faded yet, but also a little bit of sprinkle from the supply side, keeping prices relatively high in terms of percentage change. And we need to have that slow down. Now, the nasty part about that is the Federal Reserve is going to go, A, are we done yet? And B, what is the potential impact and implication of not being done or of the current interest rate environment in such a way that we expect to lose jobs? So those job losses may be coming. maybe sooner than we expect. Excuse me, but the point is this, that the Federal Reserve right now is actually predicting that we will see about a little over 1 million jobs lost by the end of this year. That's the trade-off for pushing that solid blue line through those red dots, is that we're going to have to slow down demand, slow down business spending, and ultimately slow down hiring. That nasty part of it is again the trade-off for what we basically did during 2020 and 2021 in salvaging the economy from a much deeper recession. Now, at this point, what I want to do is I want to show you. Let me see here. Here we go. I want to show you what I think is an important idea in terms of what the Federal Reserve is doing and maybe what is coming. So if you look at the 10-year Treasury versus the 3-month Treasury, economists pretty much agree that this spread between long-term and short-term government securities and what rate or yield they're paying right now is very prescient of what should be coming in the economy, and in a sense is a proxy for credit conditions in the macroeconomy. So when that blue line goes below the zero line, it usually signals that banks and credit unions are going to not want to lend as much. They're concerned about what they're getting for each new dollar lent versus how much they're paying for every new dollar coming in as supporting deposits to lend out. And when that blue line goes down, it means trouble. So you can also think of this as a type of yield curve inversion. And on the far right-hand side, you can see over the last few months, it's been surging down. Now that's for two reasons. One, the world has come toward the higher yields in the United States and knocked down the 10-year Treasury and kind of kept it in check in terms of its yield. But every time the Federal Reserve increases the interest rate that they control, which is the interbank rate, or how banks and credit unions kind of lend to each other, that blue line wants to go down. This is the evolution of the Federal Reserve's interest rate, or that so-called interbank rate, what we call the federal funds rate. So you can see on that far right-hand side, that black line depicting the federal funds rate has been surging straight up basically since March 2022. Why? Because it's trying to knock down those prices and slow down demand. So this graph is intriguing because this is somewhat unprecedented in the last 40 years in terms of how quickly rates have gone up, but we have a problem on our hands in terms of inflation that is also somewhat unprecedented since the early 1980s. In California, this is the look at jobs. So one of the things we saw in the earlier graph with the US is that we have actually seen this sort of continued jobs growth month on month. And it's been kind of intriguing to economists. We've seen it. And a lot of economists argue that the jobs data at the national level are somewhat controversial in terms of how we count it, the way we do it through these surveys from the labor market. But when you look at California, we've actually seen after seasonal adjustments, somewhat of a flattening of the original coming back or the original recovery of the jobs market in California after the contraction in early 2020. So you can see how wild the labor market's been since that peak, which is at 18.7 million people. There's this slow movement after the Great Recession up, very steady, slow, almost linear growth up to that peak, hard contraction, pretty strong comeback, but then been flattening out most of the last 8 or 9 months. The rationale is that inflation has increased a little faster in California. Jobs have also slowed down in terms of hiring because it's been tough to find people, which we will come back to, thinking of Marin County as a microcosm of that phenomenon. But the key is that we need to see that continue to go up if we expect California to continue to recover. And the key is this, as I just said, continue to recover. We have still not gained access to the total number of workers in California we had before the pandemic. We're still a couple 100,000 short of that number and have been now for about 6 or 8 months. So what's worrying economists a little bit about the California economy is how we kind of hit the top of the cycle, and especially if the American economy starts to contract based on what I've just told you, between the Federal Reserve and a lot of geopolitical uncertainty around the world, we're having a lot of headwinds for the economy, and we've been sort of toying with whether or not we're going to go into recession here anytime soon. If the California economy continues to sort of have a mixed picture in terms of jobs growth, it's a little more susceptible to a jobs market recession than, let's say, the national economy may be. So we're watching this closely as a way of sort of gauging where the state is going on average. Now, if you look at Marin County's had a very wild picture since the recession. That this blue line is the evolution of the number of people who live in Marin County who are either working or actively seeking work as the way we count it. Again, you could say there's some controversy in that. This does not include those that are self-employed. But the labor force fell initially, kicked back up a little bit, as you can see, about a third of the way moving left to right on this graph, and has been relatively flat, though rising a little bit since late 2020 and early 2021, but not getting back up to that pre-pandemic peak, which is right around 140,000 workers that are living in Marin County and actively seeking work or currently have a job. This is the amount that are employed. So the distance between these two lines is the unemployed in the county, again, as far as county residents are concerned. And when that blue line and the red line get closer to each other, the unemployment rate shrinks. When they get farther away, the unemployment rate grows. And you can see that evolution over the last few years. Now, the key there is just same thing as the labor force. We have not quite seen us come back to that pre-pandemic level. And in fact, Marin County, in its residents, the way we count them, has struggled to a certain extent getting people back to work. And we got to think about what that really means. One, we know there's a lot of self-employed people in Marin County. The latest estimates is somewhere around 5 or 6% of residents that have some wage or salary income derive it from a self-employed business in Marin County. The next stop is to say, okay, well, what does that mean really for workers that aren't necessarily based in Marin County, but that are relative to our employers in Marin County? And that's what that picture looks like. Very similar. And this is kind of a regional look. If you look at San Francisco, Alameda, Contra Costa, San Mateo, Napa, Solano, Sonoma counties, that's sort of a broader stroke of the greater Bay Area economy. Most of them have this evolution where labor force hasn't quite come back, local residents haven't quite come back, and those working in jobs in these counties have still not quite seen their jobs come all the way back yet, as employers have been somewhat reticent to hire in relatively high wage environments. And also there's been a struggle to find workers. All that summation is that Marin County's employers have not quite hired back to where we were pre-pandemic. But this is not unique to Marin County. This is something we've seen across the Bay Area. Now, one of the things we're watching closely when you add everything I've said so far up is that if the national economy is looking to shed jobs as a way of slowing down inflation, and that's kind of the focus of what the Federal Reserve is doing, and California may already be reflecting at the state level some of that job loss, or at least some of that mixed bag results in the labor market, does that mean that we're going to start to see some change in housing markets? And well, we've already seen it. So if you think about where the peak is, and I'm going to give you a little context about how to think about housing prices in just a second, because it can be a little bit weird sometimes, especially the way the markets move. This is where we've been since the peak. So for most of the counties of California, peak pricing happened somewhere between, let's say, June and August 2022, kind of the natural summer buying season. We saw a peak, and then we started to see a slide down late summer, and we've been on that slide ever since. So if you're a regular visitor to this webinar series, Mike and I have been saying for the last few months, we expected prices to kind of roll down somewhere between 10 or 15% based on interest rates rising and a slower job outlook. And to a certain extent, that's starting to show its face across most of the counties, specifically the ones in the Bay Area, some of which I outline here. You can see California's down about 5.6% since the peak. San Francisco, Alameda, San Mateo counties down a little farther than Marin County, which you can see on the far right-hand side is down about 9.2%. So they're moving in that direction. The supposition is they will continue to move down, especially if interest rates are not going to come back down a little bit. The changing cost of credit and changing labor market outlooks is going to make people think twice about whether or not they want to buy and where they want to buy, especially after 3 years of really amazingly I shouldn't say it that way. I should say that we had a really nice housing run in terms of prices rising. There's going to be some price fatigue alongside of higher cost of credit and a worsening outlook. This is the current forecast looking forward 1 year. So what I just showed you was from the peak in 2022 to the latest data, which are through March 2023 that we use from Zillow. This is what the outlook looks like for the next year or so. And you can see Marin maybe has another 1.3% to shed before it gets to the bottom of the cycle, assuming sometime in first quarter, second quarter 2024 is basically when the current slide in housing prices will kind of hit its nadir and start to swing back up a little bit. Mendocino County right now, at least among the counties that are tracked, is at the lowest 12-month look, but 3.1% is not that big of a deal. We should have expected these outcomes given the change from where we were 18 months ago. We had to shed some housing market prices, or some housing market gains, I should say. And we're starting to see that. Now, one of the things that just came out last week was the latest estimate of Marin County and all 58 counties in California, as well as the California population, and the change in terms of where we were from the beginning of calendar year 2022 to the end of calendar year 2022. And that January 1, 2023 population now shows that Marin County saw people leave the county in net again last year. And we kind of know that that story has abounded. But the two things that this graph really kind of tells is, one, not only do we see another cut, but that fall in population has basically been happening since 2017. But we're now at a population, at least the current estimates from the Department of Finance in California, that is below where we were in 2010, right at kind of the bottom of the Great Recession. So that has to affect the availability of workers, wages, and ultimately it affects our communities, especially through our school districts. And again, if you're a regular visitor here, Mike and I have shown the data in terms of the latest forecast for what's going to happen in terms of our public school attendance. A lot of that depends on drawing back a population, especially a working one. So that trend in California of having a lower population, but not necessarily changing the number of occupied housing units, means we're trading working families for older residents. And Marin County, for sure, is a microcosm of that. Somewhere between 48 and 50 years old at the median in terms of Marin County's population, which is the oldest county in California for a county that has at least 250,000 people as a population. Okay, so what's this all mean? Recession is not as important, as an economic slowdown is. So no matter what you call the current period, if it feels like things are moving slower, if businesses are not making as fast of decisions, if jobs growth is starting to slow down, and we're seeing the effects of Federal Reserve policy, and wages are higher and smaller businesses are pinched more, all that suggests that we're going to move slower, regardless of labeling recession or not. Watch for commercial real estate in the medium term. We have to expect that there's going to be some final decisions around retail spaces, restaurant spaces, office spaces, which are the big three threats in that marketplace in terms of the next stage of how people are going to look at using space. We have to try to retain our life sciences and our technology businesses here in Marin County. That's the one sort of anchored niche we have, but you have to expect that those businesses are going to have pressure on them to make change, especially during an economic downturn, and these businesses are going to start looking forward in time. And then finally, we're going to watch those housing pressures. As much as everything I've said before kind of affects the markets and the political realm, especially at the county and city level, most of the debates through the end of this decade will be about, are we achieving the RHNA numbers that we've been assigned from Plan Bay Area? Or do we have the correct housing stock diversity that supports economic development goals that we have? And where are the pressures lying in terms of providing quote unquote affordable housing? And what's that mean looking forward in terms of wage pressures for our smaller businesses? Those are the key questions that I think about. Now, we're going to hand it off to Mike now, and he's going to talk about some of the things that are going on with respect to municipal revenue.
Thanks, Rob. Before we get to that, why don't you just back up a little bit? And we don't have questions in the chat, so I'm going to take advantage of that to talk to you a little bit about the sole proprietors that you talked about. You said the latest data suggests about 5 to 6% of our labor force is self-employed or derives income that way. Do we have any sense of the sectors that those individuals are working in? Is there a way to look at that? And I'm specifically thinking about what would be sort of a services type role, like a handy person, tradesperson versus a technology related person or something. Do we have any sense of the sector that those individuals are operating in?
Yeah, we have some data, but they're about 3 years old. Primarily, Mike, they're going to be in things like construction. You nailed it. Construction, technology, professional services, a little bit, in personal services, in terms of like, let's say, hair salons, nail salons, a little bit of like, let's say, fitness consulting. Those kind of things are where you see most of that self-proprietorships in Marin County. That's what the latest data are, but they're about 3 years old in terms of providing that industry mix.
I think what's interesting for us here when we think about that is it's actually a very positive thing from a certain perspective that we've got a lot of individuals that are able to start their own businesses and run their own businesses. But it's very important to understand what is the sector they're serving, and specifically, are they serving the local market with services, which can really fluctuate, or are they in those roles serving national or even international markets, which would be deriving export revenue for the county, which is extremely important going forward. So I think this is an issue that we need to look closer at, because Marin's always had a history of strong entrepreneurial systems here. A lot of really well-known household brand companies were started here and scaled here. And so to see robust activity at the solopreneur level, if I can borrow that term, is really important and encouraging, but we want to know what sectors they're operating in. Okay, so we'll turn now to looking a little bit at the county budget. And I thought it might be useful for folks to get a handle and understand a little bit about our county budget. As some of you may know, in June, there will be a presentation from county staff to the Board of Supervisors to approve their fiscal year budget. And in March, there were actually budget hearings where the public and the Board of Supervisors had the opportunity to hear from staff about where they saw revenues and expenditures. And I'd encourage people that are interested in knowing how the county spends its money and derives its income. There's a great dashboard, interactive dashboard on the county website where you can go in and look at the budget. There's lots of good charts there and a lot of good data. But I wanted to highlight a few things for everyone here. So first of all, when we look at home prices in these briefings and more generally, it's not to try to understand, how expensive is it getting to own a home here in Marin County. That, of course, is important, but that's pretty well known. But as many of you may know, a lot of the funding that the county and jurisdictions receive is derived from property taxes. And so we wanted to take a look today a little bit at property tax versus sales taxes, because when we're looking at the economy, we're thinking a lot about, well, how much income is the county and jurisdictions deriving from sales taxes? It should be an important measure. So this chart here basically shows the evolution of sales tax income revenues across the entire county. So this is county unincorporated as well as jurisdictions. And the good news here is that for the last 2 years, we've seen those numbers higher than pre-pandemic. And so if you want to talk about, are we seeing a recovery, an economic recovery from the pandemic, from the perspective of sales tax revenues, you can start to see that story playing itself out. Now, we all know anecdotally, there are still businesses in certain sectors that are impacted by the pandemic and still recovering. But from a perspective of consumption of goods and services in the county, I think we're seeing some very encouraging signs from the sales tax revenue side of things. Next slide, please, Rob. Again, going back to property taxes. So historically, if you look at the first line there on the table, you can see that the assessment of the value of property taxes assessments has gone up about 5.5% over 20 years. And in a few subsequent years there, you can see it's sort of outperformed the historical average. But going forward, and this is the point, going forward, the county is expecting or projecting that in the next fiscal year, we will have decreased after a couple of years of very strong increases. And then going forward than that, even dropping down another percentage point to 4.5%. So this is going to have a pretty significant effect on the tax revenues that fund our services here. So when we at MEF, sorry, Rob, just go back to that. When we at MEF are talking about home prices, we're really looking at it from, okay, this one of the important perspectives here is how much property tax are we going to be looking at deriving going forward? And if home prices do decrease significantly, what impact is that going to have? As you can see here, the county is expecting that to go down a little bit in the coming years. Okay, now to put this all in perspective in terms of tax revenue, let's look at the difference here between property taxes. And again, this is just the county unincorporated here. This is what you can see, the annual sort of contribution to the budget, the property tax revenues versus sales tax revenues. And the good news is, from the perspective of having funding for services, that those property tax revenues are increasing and going up. Now, I mentioned they are expected to come down a little bit. But what's important here to understand is that the sales tax revenue that the county generates, which has historically been about $18 to $20 million, has basically stayed flat. The good news is it hasn't gone down. There are slight increases. But I think this is an important picture to understand, because a lot of people want to use the narrative that the economy is a big contributor. The sales taxes of the economy are a big contributor to county services, and they are by all means, but they really dwarf in comparison to the property tax. Anyway, there's lots of great data on that interactive dashboard that'll give you a sense of where money is being spent and where income is coming in. I highly recommend, if you have a few minutes to check out that dashboard, do so. You'll find out a lot about what services are receiving the biggest area of funding. None of them will be surprising to you, but it's again a great tool for data on how our county spends their funds. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining. I don't see any further questions in the chat, but we will be circulating this around. Please spread the word. We have a great audience that tunes in every month to this, of about 50 people or so. We really like to keep that going and increase it. So if you're not already signed up for our communications, please visit the website and do so. Thanks again for joining, and enjoy the rest of your week.